Hi, and welcome back to Fishing with David Pyle. It's November 2nd, 2019, and today I'm going to do a video, it's actually my second video, on servicing a Yamaha outboard motor. And this is done in the fall every year because you want to make sure you don't have any contaminants in your oil or your lower unit. And if you do, in fact, then you need to take that and you need to have that serviced immediately, because those contaminants will ruin the innards of your motors or the lower unit. So I put together a list of items and I set up a table, get everything assembled so that I'm not having to go in and out of my house or in and out of my garage to collect items. It's all right here for me. So I will begin by warming up the motor, and I want to get all my fluids really nice and warm so they drain out fast. It's quite cold this morning, maybe 40 degrees, 38, 40 degrees. So I want to make sure I get my motor really warm so when I drop the gear lube, it actually drains out quickly, and the oil. So that'll be the start of the process. And I will also change the fuel water separator probably before everything, just so that I can get this taken care of, not wake my neighbors up at 9 in the morning. Okay, this is the water fuel separator in my boat, and I change this out every year, and I use a marker and write the date that it was changed, so I make sure I know when it needs to be changed. It can get screwed on pretty tight and be difficult to take off, but one thing is there's fuel in here, and I want to make sure that I don't slop any of that fuel in the back of my boat. So I'm going to take a plastic bag, this is a gallon, and I'm going to put it underneath so that when I do pull this out, that I don't lose any of that fuel and make a big mess for myself. So this should be on hand tight. It's going to be probably a little difficult to take off. I'll take two hands and I'll screw it off. Pretty simple process. Okay, so I've allowed this to completely drain, and I'm going to pull it out in my Ziploc bag to prevent any spillage. And I've taken just a little bead of oil and rubbed it on this seal so that it does come off easy next year. And simply put this underneath and spin it on. And I'm just going to go until it gives me enough resistance that it doesn't want to spin any further, and then I'm done. Take my ear muffs, and I'm going to push them completely over the water intake on my outboard motor. I'll turn the water on, start this motor up, and get this motor nice and warm so that the fluids come out quickly. And so that's what we're going to begin. Make sure this is completely covered on both sides, and then simply turn on your hose and start your motor. Water flowing out of the lower unit, and at this point, once it pushes all the air out, then I'll start my motor up and begin the warming process. So here we go. Okay, at this point it's going to be about 5 minutes at least. I'll let this run and get it. Motor's been running for 5 minutes. It's nice and toasty warm, and I'm going to lift up the outdrive. Actually take the top off first. And put this somewhere safe where it's not going to fall over. I'm going to take my 14mm socket and loosen the oil drain plug. off. The tiniest bit of oil will come out if I simply unscrew this all the way, but I'm going to have my milk jug ready, which is where I'm going to dispose of my oil. So unscrew the rest by hand. My oil jug ready for any small residual, but it's not going to come flowing out hard with the motor tilted up this high. Okay, drain plug is out, and at this point nothing is drained. I'm going to stick my milk jug underneath, and I'm going to start to lower my motor gently because it will come flowing out fast. So as you can see, my milk jug filling up. I don't want to let it go too far, and then I'll pull out my second milk jug. And of course, it's a pretty cool day today, so my oil's not super warm. Here we go. So get to the point where I'll go on to my second milk jug. I'll slide this under as to not make a mess. Drain the rest of my oil. Okay, this is finished draining. Now I'm going to take my drain plug and I'm going to put it back in here. And one thing my buddy Shinya told me, it was a really good idea, was to spray some simple green on the out drive before you start this process. If you do get a little bit of oil that runs down the outdrive leg, then it will actually just slide right over the top of that simple green. So I'm trying that today. Put this drain plug in here, and a lot of times what I find the best thing to do is just put it in the socket. And of course, always a rule in auto mechanics is to screw things in hand tight. So I wouldn't do this with a socket wrench, but I'm going to screw it on by hand. And all the threads went in really nice, and now I'll tighten it down. But you never want to start with that, with the wrench on it, because you might cross thread things, and that would be bad for your motor. So here we go. Nice and snug. Next thing we'll do is take the oil filter off, and I'll talk a little bit about a tactical way to get that out, because that can be kind of messy. Okay, the next step is to get this oil filter off, and when I screw this off, oftentimes because it's horizontal and it still has motor oil in it, it leaks. And as you can see, I have one paper towel in here, but I'm going to stuff a whole bunch of paper towels because this process is always creates a mess for me. So take that example, and I'm not going to probably show you the screwing it off part of it, but I just want to say be prepared for oil to spill down there, and have some simple green ready to spray in to help clean up whatever residual might be down in your motor area. Okay, so I kind of cheated today, and I actually punctured a hole in my oil filter, and I put a plastic bag under that hole, rotated it, tried to drain out as much oil as I could drain, and then just got the whole oil filter in this bag. It seemed to reduce the mess, but it's never perfect. And can you grab that camera and bring it forward here? As you'll see, regardless of all that, even with that effort, I still get oil down here which needs to be cleaned up. And again, do the best you can. You don't want to spray any simple green in there, because you obviously don't want that in your motor. But this paper towels that are down here captured a lot of it, and some still residual can fall into the engine compartment here. So as soon as I screw this new filter on, which I'll do right now, has a little plastic on it, and make sure that you've got some oil around that edge, even though it's got probably some petroleum product on it. I'm going to spin that back on, and I go hand tight with this, but even as every year I go hand tight, by the end of the season that's on there, it's really difficult to get off. So paper towel around it, turn hand tight, and once I start my motors up, obviously I'll verify that this is not leaking. So that's about as tight as I want to go. Clean up my little mess, and then we'll be on to the next task. Nice funnel, and since it's so long, I probably stand up high on something and pour it in, make sure I don't overflow the funnel. And this is pretty basic stuff. Again, my first test, get my motor as level as I can, and I'm verifying that I'm about halfway up the dipstick. I'm not sure if the camera can pick that up or not, but that's actually right where I want to be. But the ultimate test for this is to start the motor. Just run the motor for a minute or two here, and then tilt it up for 5 minutes, tilt it back down, and then you test the oil. And that's the way, if you go on websites or talk to your mechanic, that's the way they will tell you to check your oil level. So I'll double check that now. I'm going to start my motors up. Obviously I've got to hook the water back up to it, and I'll show you that test. Make sure that we're still where we want to be. This is again the initial test, and then we'll be done with the oil change. As I said, I had my motor up after putting in the fresh motor oil, starting the motor up and running it. I'm going to let it sit for 5 minutes, and while I'm doing that, I'm going to release the drain plug of the gear lube of the lower unit, and it won't come out real fast because the top screw is still in place. So I will screw this out, expect just a little dribble out, and I want to be really careful here to make sure I don't confuse the two screws, because this one is smaller. So it also has a magnet on the end of it, and the magnet would collect any metal shavings you might have in your motor. In my case, it looks nice and clean, so that's a great sign. And you can see it's just slightly dribbling out, and now I'm going to lower this, and you'll see as soon as I unscrew the top screw, it should start draining out at a really fast rate. So here we go. Okay, unscrew the top, and there should be a little O-ring around each of these. You'll want to make sure that you replace those rings. And if you can see here on the camera, it's draining out at a much faster rate, but this stuff is pretty thick. So I'll check back with you when that's finished draining, and we'll pump in the lower unit gear lube, and then we'll recheck the oil. Okay, so almost all of my lower unit gear lube is drained out. It's kind of really slow because it's a cool day, and maybe I didn't get my motor quite as warm as I should have, but I'm going to take my hose now and hand tighten that to this lower screw, which is always a challenge with this tube, but it's a process we have to do because we're going to push the oil from the bottom up, or the gear lube from the bottom up, rather than trying to pour from top down. And the messy part of this is both putting it in and taking it out. I got to find the threads, make sure I don't cross things up. I think I found it. Nice and easy turns, and want to make sure that it's cinched up tight enough that it doesn't push any of that lube out of this bolt. Okay, so now I'm tight. I'm going to connect this to my bottle, and this is my pump mechanism, and I'll start pushing the gear lube up from the bottom. And again, we have this top hole, which is going to indicate to us that it's full. So I want to wipe off my motor or my lower unit here, make sure to get most of the grease off. I'm going to drop this down, get it nice and straight up and down, and then I'll start pumping this in. Okay, now I'll make sure my camera gets a view of this. Go ahead and turn that for me. And if we could tip the camera down just a hair. I'm pushing this through. Earlier this morning when I did my T8, this gear lube was really cold, and it took a lot of effort to push it back through. So if you can, the warmer that you have this fluid, the easier it's going to be to push through. And what I'm looking for up here is just any indication that I've filled this up. It'll push all the air out first, and then the gear lube, which is pretty thick, will start to kind of ooze out. And that's when I'll put this top plug in. Okay, so as I'm pushing on this, I've got gear lube coming out at the top, breather hole. So now it's time to put the top screw in, and in fact I've put the little gasket around it. I called it an O-ring, but it's more of a gasket. So I'll put that in the top, and we'll screw that down nice and tight. And as usual with all mechanical things, try to go hand tight before you put a tool on it. This is really the messiest part of doing any of the servicing of the motors, just because this pump and trying to unscrew things, you're gonna get greasy. So best to have some gloves, and you know, your tools are going to get a little messy. So again, a simple green to clean your tools off when you're done. But we'll tighten this guy, get it nice and snug. And now the real fun process of taking this lower one off, which is always a mess for me. So I'm going to raise the motor up a little, and if we can get the camera maybe swung over here, and I think I will try to get my oil collection unit underneath. Now this is going to come off hand tight. I've got, again, my smaller screw with a gasket on it already, so that's prepared to put into this hole when I screw this out. And it's not going to drain out really fast, but a little residual could drip out. So I'm going to try to either plug it with my finger, get this out of the way real quick. Again, this is on nice hand tight, so easy to get off, but it is a little bit of a messy thing. You're going to get some gear lube on you. Okay, screwed out. As you can see, nothing really coming out of there is substantial, and it's kind of an odd angle, but it's pointing up and diagonal, and if you get it on first try, you won't lose much gear lube. I mean, probably a paper towel would help right now. I could keep my screwdriver from having too much gear lube on it, but again, this is a little bit of a messy piece. And get this with a nice flat blade screwdriver, get that really nice and snug on there, and that's it for the lower unit. Okay, I finished with my lower unit. The lube oil is in and the two screws are tightened down. So now my motor, having been up for 5 minutes, is now back to level, and I can check the oil. So we'll check the dipstick. Obviously you want to pull it out, wipe off any residual oil, get a clean dip, and this oil looks just about perfect for me. It's between the grid marks, and unlike a car, that doesn't indicate that it's 1 quart low of oil. That indicates that it's perfect anywhere on that grid line for you. So just note that it's really important that you don't overfill these. It'll ruin your motor. So follow those guidelines, talk to your mechanic, or even go online if you don't trust what I'm telling you. But I've done a lot of research on it, and I've been doing this for 20+ years. This is the way it should be. You don't want to overfill it. Don't try to top it. Can't say enough about that. This goes back in. We're done with oil change, done with lower. We're now going to move on to the fuel filter. Okay, we're on to the internal fuel filter. Previously, I changed the water fuel separator, completely different than a actual fuel filter. And this is what it looks like for my Yamaha 90. And this is where I need to unscrew. I've loosened this already with a pair of pliers, just lightly using my pair of pliers, but I'm going to screw this off. And again, I've got a plastic bag in case there's any residual fuel. I want to make sure to dispose of that properly and ecologically. So taking this off, pretty simple, and you can see, possibly you can see the fuel inside this container. So I'm going to be really careful with that. I'm going to remove my old one, and a nice little douse of fuel got on my gloves. Take the new one, there's like an O-ring, and it just snaps right back up in. Once that's up and nice and secure, then I'm just going to leave the fuel that's in here, which looks nice and clean, and I'm going to screw this guy back where it was. And that's all there is to it. I'll do this hand tight. I definitely don't want to over tighten, but I do want to start my motor and verify that all the points that I've opened and closed today are not leaking. And then I'm done with my annual service on this motor. I will not change the spark plugs this year. I did that last year. Every other year, depending on how many hours I run my motor. So that's it. And we'll see you next time on Fishing with David Pyle. I hope you get a chance to service your own motors and save yourself a lot of money. And have a very good day.